Yep, my name is Phil Roberts. You might also know me as Raid Zero. I'm a creative retoucher and motion designer currently working out of London. Today I'm going to take you through a few projects where I've taken it from pitch to the final product. I've prepared a short show reel, especially for NAB. Hope you like it. Thanks very much. Okay, so a little bit of background about myself. I studied graphic design at university. Whilst at university, I started getting into Photoshop and doing multi-part comps in Photoshop, and then became a creative retoucher, which I have been for the last 9 years now, 6 of which have been at a company called Taylor James. I work at the London office. I'm just about to leave and go freelance, but Taylor James is a company that have offices in London, New York and LA, and they're moving into Berlin. Okay, so a couple of the projects I'm going to feature today. Heart Island, which is a pharmaceutical piece that I did in Photoshop. I'll be covering the Polygon Reduction tool and Octane Scatter. Superdry Shoe, where I worked on the pitch and the initial kind of winning of the job, and I'm going to take you through how we did that, and how to make a Scanline laser in Cinema 4D with Octane. And lastly, Bombay Sapphire. I'm going to take you through the importance of physically based shaders and the use of Index of Refraction. Okay, so Heart Island. This was a brief that came in whilst I was working at Taylor James. It was a medical pharmaceutical piece. The drug was specifically for your heart and your pancreas. The client really wanted to have this kind of natural kind of feel and feature some of their ingredients, because all their ingredients for their drug are naturally found. A couple of buzzwords that they banded around were lush and paradise, and I'm going to show you how I use the Polygon Reduction tool and Octane Scatter to complete the job. The whole job was completed in Cinema 4D and Photoshop, and again I'd just like to thank Taylor James for allowing me to present this today. Okay, so this was the initial sketch that we got from the client. As you can see, it's kind of just a quick sketch and of the idea that they wanted to get across. So rivers and kind of an anatomical heart, and in the top right hand corner there, that's actually a silhouette of a pancreas. We had to look into what shape a pancreas was, because we had to ask the client at the start of the project if it was just a random island or it was actually a different organ. So what we did with this is kind of then take it into 3D, so we could set a camera and just get some basic geometry and kind of do an overpaint just to reassure the client that we were on the same page. We kind of brought the camera down a little so we could just see a little bit more of the sky, and just started modeling the heart and the pancreas, just so it's got more of a sense of a 3D look. These are some of the references that we put together, just again to reassure the client that we're on the same page. Getting the nice turquoise water, the sand, and the transitions you get from the kind of lush greens into the sands, into the water, and all that detail. Some more islands, kind of more of the point of view that we want to create the shot in. And the waterfalls and the transitions that you get between those two surfaces, and this is more of a kind of reference on the types and styles of waterfalls and the little details that we could put in later on. This reference the client loved, and it was ultimately the kind of the one we worked off the most. So got the same sort of layout where we got a foreground, quite a big island, and then there's an island off in the background. You can see the horizon, all the detail in the water. There's like nice shallow areas where we got the nice turquoise water, and also we got the deep areas of the ocean as well. Once we ultimately won the job, we had a ZBrush artist sculpt out a anatomical heart, but because it needed to be an island, they wanted a kind of a rocky texture, and because it was created in ZBrush and exported, it actually came in at 36 million triangles. So although cinema can handle this sort of thing, we wanted to have the scene very, very nimble. So using the Polygon Reduction tool in cinema in R19, I was able to get that down to around 300,000 polys without losing any kind of detail in the rock. And side by side, you can see they're completely identical, but now in my viewport, it's going to be very, very identical. It's going to be very, very nimble, sorry. So this is kind of that initial stage where I started lighting and texturing. There's a couple of different versions that I did because I knew I was going to composite it in Photoshop. I wanted a kind of clean rock area, and then a kind of area where there's a few plants where I could paint them in where I wanted to, and then a total coverage of the plants. And I did this using Octane Scatter. So taking a few trees and then scattering them across the surface, but also using random effectors where I can rotate the trees to make it seem like there's a lot more than there actually is. So using all of these passes and taking them into Photoshop, I was able to composite a shot it's very much flexible in the way that I can paint in areas of clean rock or areas of complete coverage of trees. So this is actually the final shot. You can see how much detail has gone into it, and it was completed at 12,000 pixels by 12,000 pixels. I've actually cropped it here. Similar in the background, we've done the same sort of thing, where we've used the Polygon Reduction tool and used Octane Scatter to kind of populate it. So I'm going to take you through how I did that in cinema now. Okay, so we have our scene. Here's our kind of decimated mesh that we had before. If I just jump out of my camera and just come down here, so I've got these 3 trees down here. These trees are actually from a plugin called Loudwork, which is a great plugin. You can have varying levels of detail. So these are actually like a medium resolution. You can have low and high depending on how close your camera is going to be to your scene. So because our camera is like quite far away from our object, I use the kind of medium quality trees. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go into my objects and grab an Octane Scatter. And I'm going to drag these 3 trees into my Octane Scatter and make it a child of that. And then what I'm going to do is just change my distribution to surface and then drag my heart into this parameter here. So you should start to see the trees start populating the scene. So if I jump out my camera again and go up here, you can see all of my trees are now starting to populate my surface. But what we are getting is some of the trees are growing out of the surface in a horizontal way, and trees don't tend to do that. They tend to grow towards the sun, towards the sky. So what we can do is actually, using this normal align parameter here, if we just drag that all the way down to the bottom, you can now see all of our trees and all of our guides in here are all facing up. Now, we have 1,000 trees at the moment. 1,000 trees sounds a lot, but actually kind of the scale that we're at, we're going to need a hell of a lot more trees to get coverage. So I'm actually going to increase my count to 50,000. And now you can see we've got complete coverage over that scene. But if we go in, like all of those trees, they're all rotated the exact same way. So to get that more variation, what we're going to actually use is a random effector. So with my Octane Scatter selected, if I go into MoGraph, effector, and then random, and then go into my effectors, and I'm going to have to drag this random effector in here. And then what I'm going to do is turn off position and turn on rotation. And then in my heading, I'm just going to type in 360 degrees. So what that's going to do is, like, every tree that's scattered on that surface now is going to have a different angle between 0 and 360. So now when we go in, all the trees look very different and all have a very different rotation. And all of this is computed at render time. So in the viewport, it's only showing the guides, but as you can see on the right-hand side, we're getting all of the variation, all of the trees, and all of the shadows and the lighting kind of contributing. And that's basically how I created. And what I did is I just did varying levels of scatter. So maybe come down to 10,000. Sorry. Just so I have a few more like sparsely populated areas where maybe that's where I wanted to have the rivers coming down and things like that. Okay, so that's how I created that. And I've done a little breakdown of the kind of steps involved in building up that. So a lot of this was using photography and compositing in the CG. You can see all the levels of detail that are kind of added and added. This is when the renders come in, and then we started adding photography on top, color grading it into place, adding the kind of details and rivers and the transitions into the piece, and then it's just adding more detail as we go along into the final kind of lens distortion at the end. Okay, so Superdry Shoe. So Superdry is a clothing brand from the UK. They wanted some store advertising for some new trainers or sneakers that they wanted to feature in their stores. They've stores all around the world, and they've got these huge TV screens that they just wanted some animation for. So they came to us, and they kind of gave us an open brief, but they wanted it to be very kind of futuristic, and they really, really liked their own logo. So they wanted to feature their logo very big, and they wanted it to be fun, and we kind of pitched this idea, and I'm going to take you through some of the kind of style frames and techniques that I used to kind of win the job. It was finished in Cinema 4D and After Effects, and again produced at Taylor James. So here's a few of the style frames that I produced to kind of win the job. So they gave us a brief, again, of futuristic, and they saw all these, absolutely loved them, but they had to ultimately choose just a few to kind of drive the animation. And a couple of them that they really liked were the bottom left, where we have this kind of Scanline laser running across the shoe and just scanning it. Also with the kind of glowing effects and the displacement that we have going on as well. And of course the center one, which basically shows their logo very, very big. So I'm going to show you how I created the Scanline laser in Cinema 4D. So I've got this really, really simple scene, basically. And as I was doing this pitch, I actually came across a couple of ways to do the same thing. And I'm going to show you those two ways. So I've got this plane that I've just got in this scene here. You can see how it's intersecting with this geometry. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new Octane material. And jump into that material, and then I'm going to jump into the node editor. Okay, so first thing I'm going to need is something called the dirt node. And what the dirt node does is it's almost like ambient occlusion. So wherever you have two pieces of geometry that meet, you almost get like a dark line. And we want to kind of reverse that. So we want to actually have a light line, then everything else is missing. So if we grab a gradient node as well, and then we pipe that into the inputs, and then pipe that into my opacity. At the moment, it's not actually doing anything. We need to pop that onto our plane. Still not doing anything yet. So what we need to do is actually reverse our gradient. There we go. And now it's actually made our plane disappear from our Octane viewport here. That just means that our dirt node isn't actually strong enough yet. So we're just going to increase the strength. So I'm going to increase it to 10. And then I'm going to up my details to 50. And then my tolerance, I'm going to keep that quite low. So I'm going to go for 0.5. And we should start seeing just a very, very faint line just running over our scene. That faint line now is basically what's going to drive our emission. So we're going to grab a emissions texture, a black body emission, and just pipe that into our emission here. And then what we need to turn on is our surface brightness. And now you can see it's getting really, really bright. So now we need to turn on our double-sided, so that we're getting emission from both sides of that plane, and it's really, really blown out our scene. So what we need to do is just turn off these two parameters here, this visible on diffuse and visible on specular, and now we've really got that that scene. Sorry, we've got that plane now, and wherever it intersects that geometry, it kind of runs over and almost creates like a scan line, but when I created this, I kind of thought that it's not really acting like a laser, whereas you have a laser kind of projecting down, and wherever you have a vertical plane, it would normally fall off and then catch up when it meets the horizontal plane. So this is like a cheap and easy way of doing it. But then I wanted to create like a more realistic version of that, basically. So if I just jump into Photoshop. So I created this texture, and basically how I did that was, let's go to File, New, and then I created a texture that was 1024 by 1024. Made the resolution 72. And then I changed it to 32-bit because I'm going to use it for a light. I actually wanted this to be kind of banding free. So let's just make it actually. I'll show you how to make it. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just grab a solid color and make it black. And then grab another solid color and make it white. And then this mask here, I'm just going to click on it and invert it, so Control I. And then what I want to do is making sure snap is on. So this thing here. I'm going to drag a guide out to around the center, and then drag another guide out to the center there. And then I'm going to grab my gradient tool and make sure it's on radial, so this one up here. And make sure I'm going to swap these over so that I'm drawing white onto black. And then with my crosshairs in the center, holding shift, I'm just going to drag up. And just before I get to the end, I'm going to hit it there. And then I save this as an EXR. And I'm going to show you how I kind of brought that into my light. Okay, so I'm just going to turn off the plane that we created. And I'm just going to grab a new Octane light. So an Octane area light. And just make this come above. I'm going to rotate it so it's looking down. So clicking and then holding shift so it snaps to 10-degree increments. And then in my Octane light tag, I'm going to grab that texture that we just made. So under distribution, and it goes to C4D, Octane, image texture, and then click on my image texture and just go and choose that. Okay, so now that's in there. But what we want to do is just change this border mode. This is the reason that we didn't go right to the edge of our in our Photoshop file. It just makes sure that we've only got one instance of that that gradient in that shot. I'm going to go down into UV transform because what we want to do is transform that that texture into a really, really thin line. So by default, lock aspect ratio is checked, but we will actually change them separately. So I'm going to change X to -1, and then I'm going to change my Y to a really, really small number. So let's go 0.001, and that's going to make it really small. And what's happening at the moment is it's projecting that line over a wide place because the actual light is too big. So we're going to go down to projection first. And Mesh UV is one of the only ones that actually doesn't work. Mesh UV and triplanar. So if we just change it to something like box, you can start to see some things kind of happening, but it's way too wide. So what we actually need to do is scale down that light so it becomes more of a projector. So if we scale that right down. And then if I go back into my Octane, and in the other one where we turn surface brightness on, we need to turn it off here. And you can start to see we're starting to get all these little fireflies in there. So if we up the sample rate to say something like 1,000, you can see it's starting to project, but actually our light is still too big to get that really, really thin line. So I'm going to scale it down a little bit more, just so we get that really, really definite white line. And that now is more of a physically accurate way that a laser would work. So you're getting that fall off where it starts to get to the vertical planes. And what we can do, if we want to change the color of that, if we turn on use light color and then go back into our Octane light and then just change this color to say something like green, and then we can start to see, and you can just change that color to anything you want, so something more red, for instance. And that's how I created that. In the other Scanline, if we want to change the color of that one, if we jump back into the node editor, which is down here, and in our black body emission, if we grab a RGB spectrum, which is up here, and then just pipe this into our distribution, we can just do the same thing. So if I just hide this, we can just change the color here to anything we want, basically. So depending on what your kind of shot needs are, those two techniques to make a Scanline laser are both going to work. So that's how I created that. And I can show you a short example of that in. So I used the physical one for this one. So it's actually two lasers, so one on the top of the shoe and one on the side of the shoe, and they're just running down the shoe together as the camera animates towards the shoe. Okay, so Bombay Sapphire. So what we wanted to do is go more direct to brands. So the kind of first group of brands that we wanted to kind of hit was alcohol. I kind of had a lot of free time at one moment in time, and really wanted to kind of head up this R&D and kind of look into how we could help these brands get more content out, because sometimes photography and photo shoots can get really expensive. You have the client fly in, you have to rent a studio, you have to get a photographer, and all of these things. And having these 3D assets are really useful, because you can just use them across a multitude of places and different deliverables. And what I'd really wanted to concentrate on was the physically based materials. So starting from a base of realism. So using physically based materials, I wanted to look into the physics of how they worked. And I always start my jobs from a point of realism, because you have that reference, you have that real photography that you can then kind of sell that back to the client. It's like, this is why I've used this is why it looks this way. And then if they want to move it away from that, then that's their decision. But you ultimately have that backup of reference to support you. So that's why the importance of Index of Refraction, IOR, which I used in this project. I actually used 4 different Index of Refractions to complete this job. So we got the glass on the bottle, the alcohol inside, the glass next to it, and also the bubbles inside. So this was the initial still that I made to kind of sell it to the client. So all in Octane. It's actually only 2 renders. So in cinema, I just created the bottle, created the glass, and then worked on the shaders, worked on the lighting until I was happy, basically. Ultimately, I wanted to then make a short animation as well. So again, having the 3D assets is really, really important. This is the short animation that I actually made. So you can see there's a few different changes that I made between the still and the animation. I wanted to have like an animated background, like it feels like you're more kind of at a party or something like that, and the background is actually stock footage of a party going on, and I took that into After Effects and kind of graded it more towards the Bombay Sapphire colors, so that more turquoisey blue sort of feel, and just knocked it out of focus. But then I was able to bring that into cinema and have an animated texture on a plane that goes behind the glass, and able to render it out with all of the refraction and kind of reflections going on, which would be really, really difficult to do if you wanted to composite that. Another thing that I did as well is add kind of frosting to the glass. I wanted it to feel fresh and cold, and the way I did that was actually using roughness. So like adding a gradient across the whole glass, so the bottom of the glass wouldn't be as cold as where the actual liquid is, and then it falling off as it gets towards the lip of the glass as well. And these are the kind of things that I was selling into the client, the kind of realism and the base of realism is where I wanted to start. And then if we wanted to push it anywhere else, we could, basically. So I can show you that in cinema, so the setup I had. So you can see the bottle here. So what I've done is I've actually, all the little tiny bubbles in the glass, I've kind of scattered across the whole volume of it as well. I've kind of frosted out the glass there. And the glass on the bottle as well. And this just allows me to kind of, I can just have any, like doing all that shader development and getting the, trying different environments and different lighting styles. You can kind of have that bottle now in any situation, any kind of animation you want to use, any kind of still project you want to use as well. And this was one of the first ones that I actually did. And then I carried it across to whiskey bottles, vodka bottles, just to kind of sell that into the client. So these are the index of refractions that I actually use. So you can see alcohol, ice, glass, and water there. So this kind of unit here can be piped into any kind of physically based render. So I use this chart for any kind of reflective or refractive surface, just to kind of, for peace of mind of me, that I know I'm using the correct values, and that if it comes back from the client that, oh, the glass doesn't look quite real, or it doesn't look quite shiny the way the glass is falling off, I can always say that, well, we've started from this base of reality, and that if we want to push it, you want to make it more reflective, more refractive, we can do, but just to let you know that we're actually moving further away. So these are usually things that are transmissive, so like glass, water, liquids, but also metals as well. So you can see here we've got like gold and silver and iron, all these different materials that use the index of refraction. Okay, so that concludes my talk today. My name's Phil Roberts again. I've just turned freelance, so I'll be available from May 2018. You can contact me at raid0.com and also across social media at raid0. It's been a pleasure, and again, thanks again to Maxon for having me out. Thanks very much.